Poštovani gosti, ima tu i puno prijatelja, samo želim da vas pozdravim, da kažem da mi je jako drago što sam tu, što sam imala priliku, što sam dobila priliku da danas učestvujem u ovom panelu i da kažem da se zahvalim pre svega organizatorima na ogromnoj energiji koja je uložena i na ideji i viziji sa kojom je ovaj skup organizovan. Želim da kažem da mislim da je ovo stvarno važna inicijativa i početak vrlo važnog dijaloga unutar naših poslovnih sektora, između poslovnih sektora, među našim zemljama, naših poslovnih sektora sa našim državama i između naših država. Bez takvog dijaloga teško ćemo nalaziti rešenja za vremena koja su pred nama, a koja su sasvim sigurno teška. Sad ću da pređem na engleski, jer dvojica od panelista ne govore maternji jezik i meni samoj će onda biti lakše da se obraćam na engleskom i da vam se još jednom samostalno zahvalim na prisustvu ovde. Now, before introducing the distinguished guests in the panel today, I have to make, I think, an order of time clear. We are starting almost an hour later than foreseen, for good reasons. And I believe that if the organizers don't tell me differently, we should basically be aiming to finish about an hour later. We can try to shorten a little bit, but there is a long agenda to discuss. Let me now introduce our guests. On my left is Mr. Erik Berglof, the chief economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, which he has been since January 2006. Before coming to that function, Erik was an academic studying transition with a PhD from the Stockholm Institute from the Stockholm School of Economics and leading the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics. But I want to stress here that Erik was always an activist academic that even in those days had done much to advance policies and the capacities of the countries in transition to deal with the change they were facing. Therefore, for example, being one of the founders of the Center for Economic and Finance Research in Moscow, CEFIR, and one of the important forces in the new economic school in Moscow as well. Under his wise advice and guidance, I believe that President Miro of the EBRD has been able to take the EBRD instead of towards wrapping up and closure as the big beneficiaries of the first decade and a half of loans became mainstream and members of the new member states, into becoming a new force on a global stage or European stage that has become increasingly complex, addressing also the development challenges of the less developed parts of our broader region in Central Asia, and now we expect also Northern Africa. It is also, I will introduce all of the panelists, say 2 words to just put a frame on the discussions that will come, and then give Mr. Berglof the floor to begin. On my right is Mr. Božidar Đelić. Again, I think none of the panelists needs really an introduction, but I think it helps set our minds because we are going to discuss a very broad set of issues, and I think the division of labor here is going to be very interesting today. So, Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia, Božidar Đelić, before getting into the fray in Serbian politics, also himself worked very hands-on in transition from from the early days in Moscow with Mr. Sachs and Poland, Balcerovic, and Chubais in Russia, to eventually the well-known function as Minister of Finance in Zoran Đinđić's government, where Božidar can really be credited with the fiscal stabilization and huge reform and adjustment that the country underwent in those early years. After a stint back in the private sector as the manager for Southeast Europe in Crédit Agricole, he's back as Vice Prime Minister for European Integration since 2007 in 2 governments. And further to my right is Mr. Dario Scannapieco, Vice President of the European Investment Bank for the financing operations in Italy, Malta, and the Western Balkans, but also operations monitoring and restructuring, planning and budget, a governor in the EBRD of the EIB, and a member of the Arts Committee, which would be interesting to discuss after the panel. Mr. Scannapieco also brings a very interesting experience to this panel because in his life before the EIB, he was the Director General in the Privatization and Finance Department of the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance, focusing on the management of privatizations, monitoring of state-owned enterprises, infrastructure investment, and before that he was in the Consiglio degli Esperti, I guess it's Expert Council, advising the Ministry of Finance of Italy. Now, the European Investment Bank invests has a balance sheet of 350 billion euros in overall, but in our region over the past, this is a figure that was from 2008, it has invested 3 billion, and it's in the region excluding Croatia. And looking forward, has an external mandate from the European institutions for 8.7 billion for the period 2007-2013. So managing our part of that portfolio is extremely important for us. Now, in normal circumstances, given the theme of this gathering, we would be simply focusing on the question, is it true, and why, if so, that it is extremely important for the competitiveness of each one of our national economies to actually become integrated as a regional economy? And if so, how? What would this illustrious panel have to advise us? The problem is that we are really in extremely uncertain times, and it would be very hard to move on to these issues that inevitably are being answered by standard economic theory and practice prescriptions without having a little bit of a broader look at what is it that is going on today, how is the global economy reshaping, and what within these tectonic shifts that we are facing does the panel, but Mr. Berglof, especially as the first and most academic of the speakers, have to suggest to us to think about how to move forward. So I will now give the floor to Mr. Berglof, thereafter to Mr. Scannapieco, and then to Mr. Đelić. Thank you.
Thank you, Kori. And Kori is an activist herself, and so it's very nice to be introduced by her. And it's very inspiring to be here. I think this is the kind of meetings that are very close to the heart of the institution I work for right now. It's this meeting of minds in the private sector and trying to come together, discuss the issues. I was listening with great interest also to the panel earlier today when you need to bring together the private sector and the public sector. Unfortunately, we see in many of our countries and this region as well, it doesn't happen enough, and it's very gratifying to be part of this, and this initiative is certainly very inspiring for me. I was at the very last minute asked to give you an outlook on the world. I was going to speak about some, abstract notion of the knowledge economy and so on. But I will try to, in a very few slides, and I understand they're now being circulated. They may not be so important to look at each one of them. Most of them point downwards, only those that show risk and debt levels point upwards. So, but let me go through them in a minute. Because I think it is, as Kori was saying, a time for deep reflection and action. We are facing something very, very, very serious. And I just come from Brussels late last night, and I wish I could bring you a lot of good news. The only thing I can say is that people are in key positions are very much focused on the issues. So let me say a little bit about what has happened. So I'll walk through the slides very quickly and try to give you a sense of what I think are the key developments and the issues that come out of these developments. So if you look at the global context, what we have seen is a double hit to confidence. We see a very dramatic weakening in the confidence in policymakers' ability. And this comes against, I think, a sort of resurgence in that confidence from the early crisis response. So in the last crisis, after Lehman, after all, what was done by national governments around the world, and particularly in Europe, to stabilize the banking systems, and what was done through coordinated efforts with the international financial institutions, with the private sector in the Vienna Initiative, for example, I think reinforced people's belief that policymakers can do something. I think that is now being undermined on several fronts. There was an uncertainty about what was really the outcome of the July EU summit agreement on Greece, what will come out of the new facility, the European Financial Stability Facility. There was a concern about the EU stress tests not really taking into account the very real sovereign exposures of the banks. A concern about the US debt limit and the downgrading by S&P. And a fundamental lack of action until today, at least, on the need for bank recapitalization in Europe, in the core European banks. And finally, a sense that what's going on at the European Central Bank is, in a sense, the president or the governor fighting the last war. And so all these things taken together, I think, has weakened the confidence in policymakers' ability. The other bit of the confidence problem is about the growth prospects, because I think independent of what happens, even in very benign scenarios, we are looking at, unfortunately, a global recession. I hate to be sort of party pooper, but I think we need to be realistic about what we are looking forward to, and that is the reality. And so what has happened? Well, the numbers, unfortunately, in the first half of this year came out much more negative in core advanced economies. The leading indicators are now very close to signaling recession. If you look at the main stock indices, they have gone down since early August, and there's a very dramatic flight to safety, also depressing long-term interest rates in some core countries in Europe. Market risks are up at high level, not the levels that we saw in the Lehman crisis, but still quite high and worryingly high. The flight to safety is hitting EBRD countries as well, so we can see it's in equity markets, we can see it in the sovereign risk across our region. And all is not bad, because there have been a lot done to increase the resilience since 2008. So a global shock, but the resilience in our region has improved in some respects. So the current account deficits have been reduced. Banks are, on the whole, better capitalized in the region, positive. But there are some measures that have not improved, and so the fiscal buffers that were there are not the same any longer. The gross public financing needs are greater. The private external debt has not really come down as we would have liked. We look at NPLs. Well, they have increased, and they are unfortunately increasing still in some countries, and there are reason to worry about that. And of course, what's happened to some of the currencies, particularly relative to the Swiss franc in some core countries in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, have caused issues, of course, because of the very large exposures towards Swiss franc, particularly in Poland and Hungary. So these are clearly worrying signs, and you can look then at who is most exposed, and what you see is that some Southeast European countries and some Central Eastern European countries are very exposed to trouble in the Eurozone. And if you look at there are very strong interlinkages, actually. The IMF's regional economic outlook that was presented yesterday has a nice part that looks at these interlinkages and tries to see, what does it mean in growth. And basically, if you look at the growth rates, it's a sort of one-to-one correspondence. So a 1% lower growth in the Eurozone has a 1% lower growth rate in emerging Europe. If you look at credit, it's also when credit tightens, it almost one-to-one, not fully one-to-one impact in Eastern Europe. And I think what we are really concerned about now is this deleveraging and potential credit crunch in the region. We see an overall slowdown in growth, even in benign scenarios. We see the Greek banks struggling, systemic as they are in most of the Southeast European countries. And the absolute key issue right now is to find a way of bringing down the borrowing costs of particularly Italy, but also Spain. And these economies are fundamentally sustainable at lower interest rates, but we are unfortunately in a bad equilibrium that becomes sort of self-fulfilling. And this is the key issue facing European and international policymakers right now. And as part of this, of course, the core European banks are threatened because of their exposure to sovereign debt. So we need a very dramatic recapitalization, a coordinated, I would argue, a mandatory recapitalization, and one very soon. And this is ongoing, and I think that maybe there are some positive news, even though it's going to be not going to be easy. These are sort of unfortunately, the reality we are facing. And on top of this, we are facing the challenge of getting growth, because we cannot just have fiscal consolidation, deleveraging. We need to get growth, and particularly, of course, in the periphery countries, the countries that are most exposed now, they need growth. But it's a general problem, and this is what I was going to talk about originally, which I think is both a good and a bad story, and there's a lot of potential certainly in Southeast Europe for more growth. And what I wanted to use this short intervention is to describe a little bit what do we know about how do you create a knowledge-based economy, and what is a knowledge-based economy, and what are the elements that we can find in Southeast Europe for building this? And it's something that also EBRD has very much, or we want to focus on this going forward. I think it's not something new, but it's something that we realize that has been somehow neglected in transition, and also to some extent, I think, by us. And I'll end with that, what we think we should be doing to promote this. But I thought that there were three cases that could sort of illustrate what could be achieved in the region. These are all names that start with SK, so this Skoda, Skype, and Skokova. So Skoda, you probably remember the jokes of Skoda, why do Skodas have rear window heating? Well, so that you don't freeze when you have to push it. And you know, this was, you know, you remember the Skodas that were produced in Soviet times. What has happened since then is a remarkable transformation, a tremendous success in terms of customer response. It's now on top of charge in many advanced economies in terms of customer satisfaction. It is exporting to a number of Volkswagen plants around Europe. It's a remarkable transformation. If you take Skype, which started with a small group of programmers, some you know, managerial types from Sweden, and some business ventures from the United States. It's now a company that is valued at around 8.5 billion US dollars. The final example is Skolkovo, Russia. Skolkovo, and I put question marks around this because I think it's still a very abstract idea and there are many potential flaws in this kind of approach, but it's trying to create sort of a Silicon Valley at the heart of Moscow, at least in the suburbs of Moscow. And it started as a tax haven, but it's really, there are some very concrete signs that it may actually succeed. It is, MIT has committed to establishing its first campus overseas in Europe. A number of prominent Russian institutions are locating there. International players have committed to locate there. Again, they're all dangerous with creating these islands, but I think there's also some potential in this. So what do we know from these examples and sort of accumulated knowledge? Well, one thing which is very important is that productivity growth comes from two sources. So one is about moving the frontier, the technology frontier. One is about moving towards the frontier. And both these things are important, and particularly I would argue in this region, a lot is about moving to the frontier and taking existing technology, adjusting them, making them work in your environment. When we see the ability of European countries, and here I'm not talking just about Eastern Europe, remarkable difference in how well we do innovation, how well we do this adoption of technology. You have the examples of Finland, Sweden, where are at the very top, Switzerland at the very top, you know, in many ways, according at least to measures that we have, even more successful than the United States on many measures. On the other hand, you have, you know, some countries that really have, in many ways, fallen behind. There are countries like Latvia. I mean, on one end you have Estonia that has, you know, many of the positive signs, and you have Latvia, a neighboring country that is really lagging in this regard. But you have other European countries that are not doing so well either. And it's also remarkable that within the same European Union you have this variety. And I think there are two elements here that are key. One is how to enlarge the market, and it was already mentioned the importance of enlarging the market in, you know, by integrating within the region, but also integrating within the larger Europe. That's absolutely key for innovation. Innovation is spurred by exporting, by enlarging the market that you can sell to, because you need to distribute the cost of R&D on larger sales. You need to reform the ecosystem of innovation. It's about regulation, finance, and incentives, and I know that Božidar Đelić has been very involved in trying to do this in Serbia. It's something that is absolutely key. So let me say, finally, just a few words about some attempts to measure some of these things that we have done and how the region scores. So when we talk about trade barriers, so again, it's about enlarging the market, thinking about how we can sort of create a single market in Europe and really take it seriously. And here it's very important to remember it's not about tariffs so much, it's about all the non-tariff barriers. And we know from a lot of evidence that even very small non-tariff barriers can divert trade. And I showed you here a slide with, on the one hand, you have the business environment measures that we do. We do these measurements together with the World Bank. And that's sort of measuring how entrepreneurs like you experience the environments. Here is about trade barriers. And the other one is doing business, which is sort of measuring what it looks like on the books. And here you can see that it's not the same thing to have gotten rid of trade barriers on the books. You also need to think about how you actually get them, get rid of them for the entrepreneurs as they're trying to operate in the environment. We also do, through these BEEPs, the Business Environment Survey, look at what are the main obstacles facing businesses. And here I've just taken the countries in Southeast Europe and looked at them, and again the 3 top challenges, and you can just look at them yourself, and you can see this again reporting what business leaders tell them. Then we have also tried to look at productivity differences, and you can see that from between 2000 and 2008, some countries like Serbia has improved a lot. I mean, it maybe when you think about it, not so strange, but also countries like Poland have improved a lot, while in Bulgaria you don't see the same. And you can also see the gap. And again, remember that productivity is affected both by moving the frontier outward, but much more importantly, I would argue, moving to the frontier. And here there's a lot of potential for further growth. We also have done a management, measuring management quality and using an international established method for doing this, and done this in 12 countries. Unfortunately, only Serbia is among the countries that we looked at in this region. And it just gives you a sense that well, actually, it's not true, but so I give you here only the Serbia, the detail, but you can also see then the management scores for some of the other countries. And you can see that some countries are lagging far behind, and this is a real challenge. And of course, here it's about education as well. You can also see that just looking at the distribution of Serbian companies from these graphs, you can see that, yes, there are some very well-managed companies in Serbia. The real challenge is to get those less well-functioning companies better functioning. So there's a longer tail and fatter tail, if you want. And how can you do this? Well, very clearly results show that competition helps. It really, with the more intense competition, the better management quality is in our countries. State ownership, and not surprisingly, and here of course the causality may be difficult, not always easy to determine, but private ownership definitely improves, so privatization, engaging with the private sector helps. Education, the more employees you have with tertiary education, the better managed the firms. But also secondary schooling is very important. It comes out very strongly in this data. So to absorb technology, to adapt technology, secondary schooling is very important and not always been emphasized. Here is the slide that shows the PISA ratings. That's a measure really of secondary schooling. And you can see that in the region, the region looks quite good in most subjects when it comes to PISA. But it's still, for most countries, below the OECD average. So there is room for improvement. So if I were to summarize the key challenges for the Southeast European region in terms of creating a knowledge economy, it's about, it's fundamentally about improving the business environment, encouraging FDI, but also to take advantage of EU accession process, and that was emphasized by the previous speakers as well. So accelerate privatization, restructure medium and large state-owned companies, implement new laws that impact enterprise performance, further developing the financial sector, address corruption. These are not new things, but I think the way to do it is, of course, to bring together a business, put pressure on government to improve this, and be constructive. So finally, what does EBRD want to do with this? Well, as I said, we take it on ourselves that we have maybe not focused enough on this, and we now talk about a multi-pronged approach. So on the one hand, we want to become more serious about finding companies in the ICT sector, but also taking a horizontal approach. So looking at all companies that we invest in, and trying to bring out elements that increase the skill level. So it's about training programs, it's about collaboration between universities and companies, it's about human capital, and we think horizontally we can bring out this more clearly in our investments. We are doing a number of innovative products. We have a new program for venture capital investment, basically run by outsiders, but it's money from us. It's in the beginning, it's maybe not so big, 100 million euros, but it's really meant to be seed money for venture capital. We're doing ICT audits, free audits of companies to see where are they lacking in terms of the adoption of ICT technologies. We're taking this very much from our energy efficiency initiative, which I think in the end has really been a remarkable success. Almost 1/3 of what we do now has one or another element of energy efficiency investment. It's very important. We are also involved now in 200 ICT companies through our private equity funds, and we really want to be part of building this part of the financial system in Europe, the private equity venture capital markets. And of course this can only be done through a combination of advisory and sector dialogue and investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erik. So there is no silver bullet, but there is maybe some hope in maybe that your talk links us back to the internal resources that President Tadić was talking about. There is much that we could be using better. Anyway, thank you very much. I will now invite Mr. Scannapieco to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really a pleasure for me to be here with you in this innovative event, opening a dialogue between representative of the real economy, of the financial institution, and of the government. Today I will analyze how the public sector is responding to the current crisis, and then the focus on the interaction between public financial institutions such as the European Investment Bank and governments in the region. I ask you in advance apologies for my voice, but the air conditioning in the hotel played me a bad trick. So let me start 35 seconds to explain you what the EIB is. It is a public financial institution created in 1958 by the Treaty of Rome. It's the European Union financial arm. It supports projects consistent with the European Union objectives. The shareholders are the 27 European Union member states. Fortunately, the bank has a AAA rating, and this enables it to borrow on the financial markets at the finest terms available. Operating as a non-for-profit organization, the EIB passes on this financial advantage to its borrowers to finance investment projects. So for client EIB conditions, interest rate, but also the maturity of the loans are some of the most favorable that they can obtain. We provide also value added through appraisal and follow-up of investment projects and program. And furthermore, the intervention of the EIB in support of a project frequently acts as a catalyst to attract other lenders. Just to update the figures that we're giving at the beginning, in 2010, EIB lending reached a total of 72 billion euro. In the last 2 years, so 2009, 2010, the EIB total lending was about 150 billion. Today, we have a balance sheet of over 500 billion, and it makes the EIB the largest IFI international financial institution in the world. It is also the largest lender in Southeastern Europe with over the last 3 years, it has financed projects for more than 22.5 billion. So let's talk about the economic and financial situation. Many things have already been said. The financial crisis started in 2008. It activated an unprecedented public sector response. Government, central banks, IFIs, such as the EIB in its countries of operation, stepped in to prevent an outright collapse of both financial intermediation and real economy activity. A key component of the immediate intervention of the governments almost everywhere was a large-scale fiscal demand stimulus. While this intervention often succeeded in halting the rapid decline in aggregate demand that followed the financial crisis, it came at a great cost. Just to focus on the European Union, the average fiscal deficit soared from 0.8% of GDP in 2007 to 6.4% at the end of 2010. Government debt also rose from 59% of GDP for the European Union as a whole in 2007 to more than 80% of GDP at the end of last year. So if we look at what happened in some countries in Southeastern Europe, we note that with the exception of Greece, whose debt to GDP ratio increased from 105% in 2007 to 142% in 2008, the situation leaves wider margins of maneuver compared to the European Union. In Serbia, the debt to GDP ratio in the same period increased from 29% to 31%, in Montenegro from 26% to 42%. In Turkey, just to mention another country, it went from 39% to 36% in 2009, although it decreased to 42% in 2010. The sustainability of such trend in European Union countries' public finance has been called into question by financial markets during the last months, in particular for countries with long-standing fiscal imbalances and lack of competitiveness. The stress in the financial markets and a weaker aggregate demand have negatively affected consumer and business confidence. The European economic growth outlook is also penalized by the consequences of fiscal tightening in many European countries, as well as by the worsening economic condition in the United States and Eastern Asia. The stock market also have fallen sharply, affecting particularly the banking system. So if we look at the latest growth figures, we see that in 2011, after a strong first quarter, the expansion has slowed down, and it is expected to come to a virtual standstill by the end of the year. GDP growth for 2011 is projected to reach, on average, 1.7% in the European Union, with figures which are very heterogeneous among the various countries. If we look at Southeastern Europe, growth forecasts from the International Monetary Funds were reviewed downwards, and the vast majority of countries will not grow this year above 2%. Okay, this unfavorable picture should not, however, overshadow the work done by policymakers to address some of the root causes of the crisis. If we look at what happened in the European Union, we see that there has been, at the beginning of the crisis in 2008, a short-term reaction designed to rapidly boost demand and restore confidence. This was the European Economic Recovery Plan. So this was a short-term action. At the same time, there was this need to fix in the short term immediately and to restore confidence, to fix the economy and restore confidence. But at the same time, European Union has adopted a long-term strategy, which is called the Europe 2020 strategy. This is a long-term strategy for competitiveness, which is declined in 5 targets for the member states. The 5 targets are the following ones. The first one is that 75% of the population aged between 20 and 64 years old should be employed by 2020. The second objective is that 3% of the European Union's GDP should be invested in research and development. The third is that the 2020 climate and energy targets should be met by 2020, of course. The fourth is that educational level should be improved. Fifth objective, social inclusion should be promoted, in particular through the reduction of poverty. This long-term response is activating a program of smart and sustainable investment in the field of knowledge economy, innovation, energy efficiency projects, clean technologies and infrastructure. In other words, those are in the investments which are needed to boost competitiveness. The EIB has been at the heart of the 2008 European Economic Recovery Plan. which was deployed both in the European Union but also in partner countries. We have provided, in a context of scarce credit, financial support to many projects. In particular, let me recall that we extended loan for more than 30 billion to support European SMEs, and this has contributed to mitigate the effects of the crisis on employment. As regards the long-term response to the crisis, so the European 2020 strategy, the EIB will help achieve the strategy goals through investment in research, innovation, green energy, the fight against climate change, and the support to the knowledge economy, and of course the support to SMEs. So to sum up, the crisis has highlighted the key role that public financial institutions such as the EIB, EBRD, could play in providing credit for vital investment which otherwise would have been cancelled or at least postponed, but all this in the framework of politically well-defined strategy. So public sector support has been key in the short-term response to the crisis, but it is also key in combination with private resources for the long-term response through the support of investment which create jobs and help strengthen competitiveness and stimulate growth. So this is very important because I think that the challenge ahead is quite complex. In general, governments dealing with fiscal imbalances have scarce resources available. These resources must be used wisely, possibly in order to activate to the largest possible extent private resources to address the impact of the economic crisis. Nevertheless, government cannot ignore longer-term needs to accelerate the transition to smarter, greener, and sustainable economy, which is both more competitive and dynamic. In this respect, I really believe that the governments of the region have reacted to the crisis in a very coherent way. They have cooperated actively with IFIs in order to mitigate the effects of the crisis and reduce the possibility of a credit crunch, but at the same time, they have remained committed to investment to foster the long-term competitiveness of the region. The countries of Southeastern Europe have reacted to the crisis with the direct support of the EIB generally in two manners. On the one hand, governments have been able to maintain or increase public investment in infrastructure and to keep investing in the future. I will mention later some very interesting projects aimed at fostering the competitiveness in the future undertaken in Serbia in the fields of education and public research and development. But on the other hand, they have decided to make a specific effort to keep supporting the SMEs. And this has happened through their public development banks. I can mention some examples in Slovenia, in Croatia, in Fyrom, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Republika Srpska, or through direct borrowing, as it was the case in Serbia with the so-called APEX system, or through sovereign guarantees for commercial banks, as it was the case for Greece, Montenegro. In all cases, the EIB, but also other banks, have provided finance at favorable condition in order to support SMEs that, are very much vital in order to ensure employment in the region. Let me now expand on the activity of the EIB in Southeastern Europe, where the EIB has been present since and in particular in the Western Balkans, where it has been present since 1977. In the last 10 years, the EIB has become the largest international financier in the Western Balkans, and with a total loans assigned for about 7.5 billion, supporting all major infrastructure sectors, as well as I said before, small and medium-sized enterprises, industry, services, and local authorities. The project that we have financed contribute to sustain the overall macroeconomy of the region, and therefore its real convergence to the European Union. But we have not only, together with our colleagues from the EIB and the other financial institutions, we have not only financed the project, The bank has played also an active role in the development of a key instrument for the region, which is the Western Balkan Investment Framework. This is an initiative that we developed jointly with the European Commission, the EBRD, the Council of Europe Development Bank, the European Union member states. And the purpose of this initiative is to facilitate the preparation, the financing of priority projects in the framework of the European Union pre-accession process. In 2010, the first year of existence of this new tool, it has granted directly almost 40 million of grants for the preparation of 39 projects, which will receive a total of 2.6 billion loan from ourselves. And these loans will be mobilizing investment for some 5.2 billion. So this is a very important tool, and this will help the implementation of very important projects. Touching upon specific sector, all priority transport corridors, which will become part of the trans-European networks when the candidate countries become European Union member states, have been supported, given their strategic role on the integration of the region with the European Union. So transportation has been a key area. Another priority target for the EIB is energy. Here we focus on 5 priority areas: renewable energy, energy efficiency, research and development in the energy, security and diversification of internal supply, and security of external supply and economic development of European Union neighborhood and partner countries. It was said before by President Tadic that renewable energy sources can make an important contribution to the sustainability, regional energy supply, and security. Hydropower is the most important renewable energy, providing over 20% of the electricity in the region. And in Turkey, just to quote one example, we have financed the construction of 8 hydropower plants with a total capacity of 955 megawatt. However, while significant potential for hydropower remains untapped, other sources can be explored, notably wind and solar energy. And we have many projects in these fields at present which are developed. I can quote some projects, for instance, in Cyprus, which is a country which at current is 100% dependent on oil, but thanks to the investment that we are supporting, will increase its share in renewable energy to 13% by 2020. In the energy efficiency sector, we are, for instance, apprising a project consisting in the refinancing of the thermal rehabilitation of apartment buildings in Bucharest, and this will allow to reduce to 50% their energy consumption. So infrastructure is one field, one priority, energy, but also SMEs. With reference to the SMEs, for which the EIB relies on the partnership with local financial institutions to outreach the entrepreneurs, it is to be noted a rapid development of loans in the last years, reaching in the Western Balkans a total amount of 2.4 billion in the last 10 years. In the last 5 years, nearly 1 billion has been disbursed to almost 2,000 SMEs, supporting employment and benefiting indirectly and directly the population of the Western Balkans and Croatia. Finally, over the last years, the EIB has adapted its intervention in the region, in the Western Balkans, to the changing need of each country. As a way of example, and this is something that probably we can notice more than those living here, we have seen how the needs have changed. For instance, I mean, in Serbia, but in other countries of the Western Balkans, we have moved from a support to the necessity of rapidly rebuilding material infrastructure, also in the immediate post-war period, to the development of more long-term oriented projects, such as the support to education, research and development, which are so crucial for the development of competitiveness in the area. So we have seen that there are different countries, each one of them have different needs, and we are able to support all of them. In this regard, also since Deputy Prime Minister Đelić is here, let me mention that in March 2010, the EIB signed with the Republic of Serbia 200 million loan to finance an investment program aimed at revitalizing public research and development activity. Investments include the upgrading of existing infrastructure, creation of a center for the promotion of science, creation of centers of excellence in priority research field. And this project also benefits of the grants provided by the Western Balkan Investment Framework. So it is very important. We keep on focusing on infrastructure and let's say, on material infrastructure, but we also have started to support what we can call immaterial infrastructure. So projects that will provide some fruit, which will be very relevant to enhance the competitiveness of the region. Let me conclude by looking at what stays ahead. Despite and throughout the crisis, the government of the region seem to be committed to create a friendly business environment. These strategies for us are clear and are aimed at fostering economic growth and competitiveness. Governments are implementing these strategies by supporting the development of a modern network of infrastructure, by supporting investment in research and development, and by sustaining employment. This last objective, the sustainment of employment, is pursued both by attracting foreign direct investment and ensuring adequate access to credit for local SMEs. Moreover, local governments seem committed to achieve some progresses on regulatory, fiscal, and tax reforms too. We also have noticed the increase in their intention to work closely together with the European Union towards enhancing regional cooperation and commercial interaction. These economic and structural reforms have led to a more stable macroeconomic environment, which is crucial for a sustainable economic growth and increase of foreign direct investment. In this regard, when talking about foreign direct investment, let me also quote briefly the 500 million loan that we extended to the Fiat Group in order to modernize and expand the production capacity of the automotive plant in Kragujevac. So all in all, the region is definitely on a good path. Nevertheless, there is more to be done to tackle the challenges ahead. Reforms should keep targeting the enhancement of Southeastern Europe growth potential and focus, inter alia, on further improving the business environment through the finalization of the privatization agendas, implementing public administration reforms, and accelerating the reform of the judiciary system to support the anti-corruption efforts, reinforcing the existing labor force through the detection and correction of skill mismatches through education reforms, advancing the flexibility in the labor market, deepening trade integration, and supporting innovation and research. So in conclusion, in recent years, lending activity of the EIB in the pre-accession area have kept increasing, and I'm sure that the EIB will continue in the future to contribute to boost the competitive growth of the region and will be ready to support a steady economic and social development of this very strategic part of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scannapieco. This is very encouraging because it really what you're saying is there is still a lot to be done. The funding is not going to all dry out. We don't think we will see the inflows of foreign capital that we benefited from up to 2008, but knowing that the EIB will be there with these plans and putting in a greater effort to make more out of our resources, maybe we can move on forward. Mr. Đelić, thank you.
Hvala, Kori. Ja ću govoriti sa mesta i mislim da je najbolje da, imajući u vidu da je već mnogo toga rečeno, prvo ću govoriti na srpskom jeziku, a posle ću preći na kraju malo na engleski. Najbolje možda da komentarišem ovo što je tema današnjeg panela u svetlu onoga što je rečeno sa strane predsjednika i na ovom panelu. Možda prvo jedna mala dijagnoza na temu, a tema jeste kako privatni sektor može da pomogne vladama da se bolje pozicionira naš region. Drugi element to je možda, da kažem, nekoliko sugestija i na kraju, pošto sam deo izvršne vlasti, to boga mi evo, kao što reče Kori, skoro 10 godina sa jednom pauzom, ipak nekoliko konkretnih predloga. I nadam se da u panelima koje dolaze će prisutni imati mogućnosti možda i o tome da raspravljaju. Ja lično, a i drugi članovi vlade u koje ime ovde govorim, bi bili veoma zainteresovani da dobijemo i vaše sugestije i zaključke. Dijagnoza. Kada su 10 novih članica Evropske unije ušle 2004. godine, pa onda još 2007. godine, većina iz bivšeg socijalističkog bloka, mnogi su rekli da ono što je sledeće jeste da Zapadni Balkan, definicija koja najmanje smeta, je ona sledeća zona brzog rasta i da tamo gde je bila jedna višegradska grupa u prethodnoj deceniji, tadašnjoj deceniji kada su ušli u Evropsku uniju, očekuje nas nova decenija koja će pripadati zapravo Zapadnom Balkanu, na način na koji je pripadala višegradskoj grupi. I u početku je možda to tako izgledalo dok smo imali visoke stope rasta. Međutim, od početka ove velike svetske krize vidimo da nekako naš region ne može još da pretenduje da je postao nova višegradska grupa brzog rasta i ne može u potpunosti da iskaže svoj potencijal. Ja vidim dva ključna razloga za to. Prvi je sama kriza, jer sigurno da je sama kriza dovela nas je mnoge iz neke ofanzive, mnogi su prešli u defanzivu. Evropa iz ofanzive da menja stvari, u ovom momentu niko nije mogao tada, 2007. godine, na primjer, da predvidi da će nam chief economist Evropske banke za obnovu i razvoj doći sa sastanka ključnih ljudi iz Evrope i kaže imam dobru vest, nije sve propalo. I svi su fokusirani na tome da to tako ne bude. I naravno da se bave sobom umesto da se bave nama na način na koji su se bavili zemljama koje su ušle 2004. i 2007. I to je isto i u regionu. U regionu imali smo u mnogo čemu potrebu da obezbedimo bar stabilnost i da se očuva onaj kapacitet koji je postojao pre nego što su mnogi krenuli u dalje integracije i u dalje korake. Međutim, ne bi bilo tačno da kažemo da je to bio jedini problem. Postoji jedan drugi problem i to je razlika između višegradske grupe i ove grupe zemalja. Višegradska grupa je isto izlazila iz jedne ideologije i onoga što su oni videli jedne dominacije, videvši evropske integracije, pa i ulazak u NATO pakt za njih kao jedna forma polisa osiguranja za dobrobit i za bezbednost. Dok ovde u regionu u suštini bilo je više pitanja kakvi su odnosi među nama. I danas vidimo da to pitanje nije u potpunosti iza nas. Treba i dalje raditi na tome. I dalje ima situacija gde, naročito u momentu predizbornih kampanja, padaju dosta teške reči, nepotrebne, i koje ne unapređuju naše zajedničke odnose. I zbog toga mislim da je veoma bitno, ukoliko želimo da Zapadni Balkan, i sad više nema te definicije ko je unutar Evropske unije, a ko nije, jer vidimo da cifre oni koji su van Unije nisu uvek loši od onih koji su unutra sada. Evo, mi smo uzajmili $1 milijardu pre 2 nedelje po uslovima boljih od mnogih zemalja Evropske unije. Verovali ili ne, ali to je jednostavno tako i to smo uradili bez podrške naših dragih prijatelja finansijera koji su ovde. I mislim da treba, naravno, raditi na tome da ekonomska situacija bude bolja, ali i raditi na tome da se više osjeća zajedništvo. To nije nemoguće. Ja se sećam početkom prošle decenije da je i dalje bilo nekih tenzija između Srbije i Slovenije. Njih uopšte više nema. Videli smo u ovom prethodnom panelu, nema više nijednog otvorenog pitanja između Srbije i Slovenije i sada je sasvim sigurno više po pitanju umešnost i mogućnost ekonomskih grupa da nađu svoje mesto na tržištu u drugoj državi i ništa više. Ali tome je prethodilo i debata i rešenje, kao što rekao predsednik Turk, nekih pitanja koje su veoma realna i koje je apsolutno moguće rešiti. Što se tiče Srbije, naravno, sledeća krupno bilateralno pitanje za nas jeste da vidimo da li Hrvatska stvarno želi ili ne želi zajedništvo. Što se nas tiče, mi smo otvoreni, to smo dokazali kroz otvorenost naših tržišta za investicije. Mislim da godina, dve koje dolaze moraju da pokažu da li je Hrvatska spremna na to isto. Ukoliko nije, strah me je, ne zbog toga što će bilo koja vlada dati neko crveno signal ili neku zabranu, jednostavno neće biti raspoloženje da se ide dalje. I to bi bilo šteta. To bi bilo šteta i za nas, i za Hrvatsku, i za ceo region. I mi se nadamo da ćemo imati mogućnosti u mesecima i godinama koje dolaze, da na način na koje se odnosi između Srbije i Slovenije napredili, da tako bude i sa Republikom Hrvatskom, jer nije dobro da svaki do poslednjeg investitora iz Srbije nam kaže da nemaju mogućnosti da ulažu u toj zemlji. I da svako, bez izuzetaka, je imao probleme do te mere da je mogao da odustane od njegove investicije, to jest da ide po sudovima da bi obezbedio minimalna prava. Što se tiče, da kažem, puta napred, ja ne bih sad ponavljao neke cifre i mogućnosti, najradije bih rekao, kao što je naš kolega iz Hypo Alpe Adria banke rekao malo pre, ima mnogo mogućnosti. To su rekli predsednici. Čuli smo da postoje i finansijeri. Evropska investiciona banka, tu je Evropska banka za obnovu i razvoj, tu su i komercijalne banke koje u skladu jednog dosta originalnog zajedničkog pokreta u okviru jedne takozvane bečke grupe su obezbedili da podrška regionu na jednoj dobrovoljnoj bazi ne opadne. I to se zapravo i desilo i zbog toga, čini mi se, je očuvano i poverenje u banke uz dobru regulacionu politiku. Imamo adekvatnost kapitala koja je bolja od mnogih drugih zemalja u Evropskoj uniji. Sada, ja bih samo dao ilustraciju nekih stvari koje bi mogle da se urade i uzet ću, ajde, na primjer, ovo što je rekao moj dragi prijatelj Erik, u svetlu onoga što je rekao i Dario. 3 teme. Kako povećati tržište? Mislim da imamo početak formiranja regionalnih šampiona. Ti regionalni šampioni mogu da budu slovenačka firma koja je prisutna u regionu, ili hrvatska, ili srpska, ili bosanska, ili već koja, ili pak želja određenih finansijskih i industrijskih grupa koje su van regiona da se ozbiljno posvete našem regionu, da postanu specijalisti našeg regiona, da bi iskoristili mogućnosti izvoza ne samo u regionu, nego prema Evropskoj uniji, Turskoj i bivšem Sovjetskom savezu. O tome je bilo priče malo pre. I mislim da favorizovanje ovih regionalnih šampiona, koji će omogućiti da se u potpunosti iskaže komparativna prednost našeg regiona, koja nije samo u domenu jeftinoće naše radne snage kad se uporedi sa njenom produktivnošću, je nešto na čemu, mislim, bi trebalo da radimo mnogo više svi zajedno u godinama koje dolaze. Za to, naravno, postoje pretpostavka da svetu ide malo bolje i da budemo iskreni u tome da ne bude tako da samo jedan ima šampione, a da drugi samo daju tržište. Drugi element, to je pitanje uslova za biznis. I mislim da smo ovde svi u regionu više uradili nego što se danas vidi u ovim anketama. Jer kada vidim, na primjer, anketu Svetskog ekonomskog foruma, gde naši privrednici nas rangiraju iza Haitija i Burundija po brain drainu, to jest odlivu mozgova, verujem da time kažu da problem postoji, ali da posao onako malo balkanski, kad nešto nije dobro, baš ga loše oceni. I onda vidimo da onda posle to ide refleksivno, to se uzme kao navodna neka objektivna merila i onda dodatno nas sve ubeđuje da stvarno nismo mnogo napredovali u tom domenu. Grade se autoputevi, grade se modernije energetska postrojenja, ali njih nema dovoljno. I ja bih ovde odmah hteo da kažem da model koji smo imali u poslednjih 10 godina nije loš, ali mora da bude unapređen. A model je bio, kao što rekao Dario malo pre, razvojna banka, suverena garancija. I tu i tamo, ali na mnogo manjim projektima, poneka koncesija i poneki javno-privatni zajednički projekat. To neće biti dovoljno, jer pod ovim okolnostima, gde tržišta i tekako žestoko kažnjavaju bilo koju zemlju koja se iole približi ne likvidnosti, nego solventnosti u nekom dužem periodu, kada se napada jedna Italija, kada jedna Slovenija, koja je dobro vođena zemlja, izgubi 2 noča u S&P-u, Dobro, mi smo dobili, nas su upgradeovali, ali nema garancije da će to tako i biti, ne možemo biti izolovani. U svakom slučaju, veoma je bitno da Evropska unija, u koju neće do kraja ove decenije ući većina zemalja Zapadnog Balkana posle Hrvatske, budimo realni, bitno je da se iskoriste mogućnosti poput fonda koje je Evropska komisija predložila, a zove se Connecting Europe ili Povežimo Evropu, od 50 milijardi eura, na načina da infrastruktura koja je evropskog značaja, a samim tim mora biti i regionalnog značaja, dobije bar delimično finansiranje iz evropskog budžeta, onda bi za tu železnicu o kojoj je govorio predsednik Tadić imali mogućnosti da kombinujemo sa resursima međunarodnih finansijskih institucija, domaćim novcem i možda elementom koncesija privatnih investicija. Po tim uslovima možemo da izgradimo tu nužnu infrastrukturu za 10, a ne za 30 do 40 godina. A limit, moram da vam kažem, ćemo svi u regionu sresti ne za 10 godina, nego za 3, ako se to ne desi. I zbog toga je bitno da već 2014. godine, kada počne nova finansijska perspektiva Evropske unije, te mogućnosti budu otvorene za najbolje projekte koje ima naš region. Pomenuo sam železnicu, dodao bih Dunav, pričao bih o vezama za gas, za naftu i za struju koje postoje u našem regionu, kao naravno i investicije u domenu ekologije i napokon socijalne inkluzije, da neke osetljive grupe poput Roma i drugih budu predmet bolje inkluzije u godinama koje dolaze. Ovo što sam sad rekao je predmet apsolutnog real politike i onako tvrdokornog zajedničkog interesa, a ne neke privilegije ili simpatije koje bi možda Evropa imala prema nama ili mi jedni prema drugime u ovom regionu. I posljednja stvar, to je ekonomija znanja. Nemoguće je zamisliti naš region koji bi došao čak i do pola bruto domaćeg proizvoda proseka Evropske unije. Meni je milo da vidim da Slovenija sada hoće da uđe u top 15. Tu vidim da više ne žele da pripadaju onih 10 novih, 12 novih, hoće da budu bolji od onih 15 starih. I ja to pozdravljam. To je dobra ambicija. Za nas realnije moramo da radimo na tome da očuvamo u onoj meri koliko je to moguće našu intelektualnu elitu, našu poslovnu elitu. Mislim da je ne čuvamo dovoljno. Mislim da prebrzo napadamo ljude koji pokazuju neke spoljnašne signale uspeha. Mislim da moramo da pripazimo na sve to, jer na kraju krajeva oni su mobilni. Najmobilnije je ta intelektualna poslovna elita koja će se veoma lako reciklirati i snaći na drugom mestu. I zbog toga smo mi sa Evropskom investicionom bankom, i tu sam zahvalan toj instituciji, Dariju lično, imali tih prvih 200 miliona eura sa kojima se sada završava tehnopark na Zvezdari, koji je bio jedna betonska grozota na Zvezdari. Već sada razgovaramo ne samo sa lokalnim start-upovima, nego i sa velikim tehnološkim kompanijama, kad se usele, o tome ću vam pričati, da to zaživi. Imamo centar za matične ćelije u Kragujevcu, radi se na novom modelu mnogobrojne infrastrukturi za našu Petnicu, na tehnoparku u Novom Sadu i u Nišu i jednom centru za nanonauke, gde sada već imamo 2 Nobelovca koje su prihvatila da budu u našem naučnom savetu. To je način na koji možemo našu naučnu dijasporu, naše ljude na bolji način da vežemo. A onda kad to radimo, imamo prijatelje iz Hrvatske, na primer, gospođa Ramljak, koja vodi najveći institut tamo, Ruđer Bošković, koji kaže šta vi to radite u Srbiji? I onda počinjemo da razmenjujemo. I onda počinje jedna veoma prijatna trka, ko će bolje, ko će više. I u tom smislu mislim da moramo da damo dovoljno razloga za one koji su najmobilniji da provedu dobar deo njihove karijere kod nas. Jer u protivnom, slaba vajda od tih autoputeva i od tih postrojenja, ako oni budu potrebni da ljudi odlaze, a mi samo gledamo transport roba između Turske i Berlina, i Francuske i Milana, zbog toga je veoma bitno da nastavimo na ovom putu i zbog toga u decembru mesecu nas očekuje, to je pomenuo i Erik malo pre, imaćemo 100 miliona eura kao početak platforme koje će podržavati inovativna mala i srednja preduzeća u godinama koje dolaze. To je samo početak. Verujem da treba da sve više jačamo taj deo naših investicija, taj deo našeg napora. Kao što ćemo podržati i one koje izvoze, evo Apex 4, Dario priča o Apexu 3, to je bilo za likvidnost malih i srednjih preduzeća, Apex 4 je u potpunosti posvećen izvoznicima. I to je nešto što, verujem, će dati mogućnosti mnogim firmama koje su prisutne ovde. And then in closing in English, I'd like to say that nobody said one day that Ireland will be successful. But then nobody said that Ireland should be in the midst of a big financial crisis because the big winds of unfettered speculation in finance and also in real estate will be left to go there. And then nobody said that Ireland will be the first to recover from this crisis. Because at the end of the day, it's about people and their will to succeed. I think here we are in the region, there is ample proof that working together, we can be individually stronger. We need to learn both to compete and to collaborate at the same time. This is something which is a skill that I think the region can only gain at its own benefit and can ignore at its own peril. And with the present, I would say, regional champions that we have here and those who aspire to be, I can only say one thing: help us, the governments, to be even more helpful. The more united you are, the more united we will need to be as governments. And at this condition, after the Visegrad group, maybe we can have the Aranđelovac group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tomorrow we will be discussing in greater detail, this gathering will be discussing in greater detail the needs in the areas of infrastructure investment, energy investment, and collaboration that can lead to partnerships for new markets. Basically, I think these three areas are ordered exactly in order of concreteness. It is very clear what is necessary to build infrastructure. It already becomes a little more complex to collaborate on the energy sector regionally. And then for partnerships for new markets, we start getting into a sphere that is very hard to simply plan and make happen. And then we get to the smart economy that was mentioned by all speakers here. And the fact that I actually believe not only for ITC and smart economy, but almost for any revival, encouragement, and advancement of sectors that have suffered from transition losses, from the decay that has affected this region for 20 years, it is necessary to be smart to design policies right. There is no silver bullet. There is no simple answers that can be read in textbooks. What will be necessary, and especially in a difficult time of crisis where great capital flows are not going to help us overcome problems and capacity gaps, is going to be very smart, very well informed, to have discussed policy options piece by piece. If you agree with me, and I would say there were a few views here that suggested this, then what I would like to have our panelists discuss briefly from their different angles before I open the floor is how do we engage in the necessary dialogue, in the collective action, in the relationship. Some information is held by government institutions, others by experts. And a lot of information, critical information, is held by the business sector itself that knows what it needs on a case-by-case basis. What is it? Can it be brought together in a productive manner that would build? What are the possibilities of this kind of dialogue, and what are the channels of this kind of collective action? And I will again start from Mr. Berglof, because I know that he was one of, if not the, I'm not 100% sure, initiators of the Vienna Accord that Mr. Đelić mentioned a minute ago, where there was a very important proof of the importance and need of collective action that I must say as an economist is not normally taught in economics books. So, but I would also then ask Mr. Scannapieco to also comment on that, maybe also drawing on your experience from the government of Italy, and where you did stand between the public and private sector very much. And finally, with Božidar, to directly ask you how much have you consulted with the private sector in designing the technoparks, and how do you plan to work on this in the future? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kori. Well, coordination is... Sorry. So, yeah, sorry. So, thank you, Kori. Yeah, so I think the world is full of coordination failures. They're at the very high level, like we were many who were part of this Vienna initiative. It was an obvious coordination failure that, you know, if we left things to their own, we would have a massive deleveraging, a massive flight from Eastern Europe. Each bank, knowing that there would be deleveraging, would have an incentive, individual incentive, to withdraw first. But the banks as a collective had an incentive to stay engaged, and that was the basic principle that we worked after. It involved coordination not only among the private participants, but also between the private and the public, and between the host and the home countries. And I'm sorry to say we are facing almost the same problem right now. We are facing, in dealing with the crisis, there are two fundamental coordination problems that we are facing. One is the more or less the same problem that now we have bank recapitalization. And we're very concerned that the more national this gets, the more this is driven by individual states and individual advanced economies in Western Europe, the less the concerns of this region will be taken into account. So what we are trying to get to now is look at these groups as groups, not as individual banks in France or in Germany or in Belgium, whatever. They are groups, and they should be treated as such when we do these capitalization efforts. And many may need to contribute to that, but that's the fundamental view. Similarly, we need to think about how to break the sell-offs of Spanish and Italian bonds. We need to find a way of breaking that circuit. I think coordination is needed for that. But I think coordination works at many, many levels, and it's really... I think what was brought Ireland, so Ireland was used as an example, and indeed Ireland is a very good example and something encouraging in what's going on right now. It is the business environment, and to that contributes both the very high level of human capital, but also the government and business working very closely together. That is what has, I think, made Ireland a comeback kid, and that's what we need to look at. So there are clever ways of doing this, and we need to think about how we can, and this is something that I have learned in a sort of humble way from seeing, coming from an academic world, sitting in an institution that has 90% bankers, and the rest of us are trying to help them and think about what they're doing or support them in different ways. But it's really about getting a private sector perspective into and use the private sector vision to get investments going. So it's about, I think, thinking from this region, obviously finding ways of bringing money in that brings together different players in the region, bringing them into our existing region in the rest of Europe. And I think there is a strong need to integrate also between Southeast Europe and Central Europe. We know that in Central Europe, the integration with the European core came first. Then came the integration within Central Europe. We are seeing some of the same thing happening in Southeast Europe, but we also need to create links between these two parts of the world. But we're also very keen to, in a clever way, bring in these actors from this region into our new region, the North Africa and the Middle East. And I think this could be a very interesting platform to invest from, and we would find ways of using the experience that we have in this part of the world and bring it to our new region. I think there are many ways that one can do this. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. I think that if we see what has happened in the last month, we can draw two very important lessons. The first one is the importance to design clear-cut strategies, and those strategies cannot be national strategies. They have to be regional strategies. I mentioned in my speech the Europe 2020 strategy, where there we have 5 priorities which are very clear and objectives which can be measured. But and this is one side. The other side is how to implement these strategies. And for instance, the European Union has developed new tools, what has been called the European semester, essentially a moment in which, before defining the budget law for next year, there is a political dialogue in order to coordinate at the European Union level all the actions that have been done by the various member states in order to achieve the objectives. So it's not only fixing the Maastricht criteria, which remains, but also how to foster competitiveness and in what way to achieve the goals that have been set. So this will help also to have a more unified strategies. And this is very, very important because it fosters coordination and it fosters the dialogue. Another element, another lessons that can be drawn and for which I think the kind of dialogue that is opened by an event such as this one is how to leverage the resources that are available for the public sector, and how to combine them with the financial sector. And I make a very, very simple example. We frequently talk about PPPs as a panacea to develop, infrastructure without a strong financial involvement of the public sector. But I mean, PPP has to be something, more than a simple acronym. And one idea that we are developing also as European Investment Bank is how to combine, the national resources, the IFI resources, and the resources that could come from the private sector. And some examples on very concrete projects that, for instance, we are developing in Spain is that national resources can no longer finance 100% of the works. They will take the equity part of an investment. IFIs will do credit enhancement, so we'll take a mezzanine part of the investment and bring the senior part up to a level in which institutional investors such as pension funds, insurance companies can invest. So you can see that there is a synergy between what the private sector can do. I mean, the private sector cannot undertake some risks which have to typically be taken by the public sector with the equity part. The public institutions such as the European Investment Bank, EBRD, or local policy-driven bank, I think of Caisse de dépôt et consignation in France, KfW, Cassa Depositi and Prestiti in Italy, they will intervene to bring the rating of a senior part to a level where the private investor can invest. So there is this dialogue in which the private sector tells to the public sector, listen, this is what we can do, but on the other side, you have to take the equity and allow us to reach this level of rating so that we can intervene. And this is one part. The other part is that the public sector has to do a lot in order to make projects to be financed, for instance, via project bond. If we do not have clarity on the times and cost of construction, on regulatory regime that will define how the tariffs will be fixed. So essentially, if the public sector does not help in defining a clear setting of the cash flows that will be generated by an infrastructure, then it will be difficult to promote the intervention of private sector. So you see, in this moment of very scarce public resources, we have to combine and to exploit the synergies from these three sources. And again, this could be one of the objectives of the dialogue on one of those panels that we will be holding tomorrow.
Before giving then the floor, can I just ask you then, to Mr. Đelić, you've mentioned here a very critical role of what are essentially development banks, as if intermediaries in also the distribution of risk, the mobilizers of the capital, and in the end, the dialogue between the private and public sector. I wonder whether Mr. Đelić would like to comment on that as well, but since I know that there are some plans in this direction in Serbia. Okay.
Okay, so there are three questions. Before I move to the technoparks, just for this one, yes, we are working with KfW, who are kind enough to help us set up the Serbian Development Bank, and we should have by year-end the law. We have to navigate the pitfalls of what has been seen as the moral hazard aspect of development banks. Let's not kid ourselves. There are development banks that were used as a political tool and that ended in very big deficits that then had to be covered by the taxpayer. So it's a very bad idea to do such a thing today. It was never a good idea, but now it's an especially bad idea, because countries that do it will be doubly punished, not only for the amount, but also for the implicit risk that some people would say. So that's why we're trying to build a development bank which will actually do at every point of time a clear mandate where there is a market failure and with a very clear extension of the fiscal risk that is involved. So on the second aspect, I would just like to add that interesting what both our bankers said. In a way, I surprised myself with my colleagues from the region. In fact, for the last 2 years, we're trying to piggyback on certain things that they do, and we're trying to insert the Western Balkans for our own, and I hope the Europe's benefit in all of this. One aspect is this European semester. We have a common Western Balkan position proposing to the European Union, even before we join, to join the European semester. The proposal is, you want no new Greece, as people sometimes say, no problem. We agree in the process of joining the European Union to show you our public finances, not only the annual budget, but also the pension systems. Look at Slovenia. Slovenia needs to increase its pension age, but that was defeated in a populistic popular referendum. Let's do it before we join, so that we enter progressively, not in 1 year, but on a 10-year path, our overall public finance and social security system, so that it is sustainable. In reverse, give us guarantees, and here's one idea, I think, for all of us in the region. What is scarce today is AAAs. And we have 3 AAAs around us. There is the man on my right, the man on my left, and then a couple of people from the European Union around. And so they have not much free cash to give us, but maybe we can find an understanding on renting their balance sheet or having them enhance our balance sheet. And this is a bit what Dario was explaining, and all the imagination that people can have here is more than welcome to do it. And I see Lou Breffort, I have to mention the World Bank, of course, because otherwise our last AAA friend will feel antagonized, and this is not what we want to do. Now to the technoparks. The person who has been the most influential on this concept is a guy called Božinović, who is from Niš and has a startup in the Silicon Valley, and 6 years of employing software developers in Niš for his startup in Palo Alto. And basically, him and a couple of other people have been helping us think through the model of how we should do it. Is it bulletproof? It's not bulletproof. There's a lot of hard work to make sure that it's not only a nice building. You can have a nice building, but who cares? A real incubator And that's why what we do there has to be to avoid some of the Skolkovo syndrome that potentially exists of what Erik mentioned earlier. If you have an isolated thing, the bigger market you are, the more the technological companies will be nice to you and say, yeah, sure, we will do something with you. And the bigger you are, since you produce some of the best talent in math and natural sciences, some universities will be to you. But only with one idea, is to continue to take your best brains. So it has to be homegrown. So indeed, the model for us is Ireland and Israel. That's it. Nothing is perfect as a model. You have to have homegrown, domestically felt initiative, and maybe one day some of those companies will be sold. Then those guys and girls will become the business angels. They will invest, and here you have it. Then you start to have some sustainability. My dream is to have a couple of professors from Belgrade, Novi Sad universities, or some people who are startup makers, who exit through an IPO or sell to a bigger technological company, and then this makes the headline news in Serbia, and people say, whoa, look at this. The fastest legal way to become wealthy. Because that's what gives the enthusiasm also in the United States and in other places. So I think we made it with them. Are we sure it's going to work? The proof will be in the exit.
Thank you. And now I would like to open the floor for your questions. I don't know where is the microphone, but okay, the microphone is in the corner. A question in the corner. Here. Please, if you can introduce yourself. Molim vas, predstavite se.
Dobro večer, Miljan Zrali iz Evropske banke iz Londona. Može na srpskom ili na engleskom pitanje za vicepremijera Đelića. S obzirom da je vaš fokus trenutno na ekonomiji znanja i na nove investicije u tom pogledu, da li je, pošto ja dolazim iz tog sektora, moguće nešto uraditi ili da li radite na planu ekonomije znanja koje će biti primjenjene u sektoru poljoprivrede? Jer mislim da tu generalno Srbija relativno dobro stoji u odnosu na region, ali ni blizu gde bi mogla, naročito u razvoju i većih faza prerade, a naročito i posticanju nekih novih kultura, semena, radi porasta, prinosa i tako dalje. S obzirom da smo tu čak i ispod 50%, kao smo sa GDP-om, tako smo i sa prinosima u proseku u odnosu na Evropsku uniju. Hvala.
Pa vi kao da ste bili na sastanku koji sam imao sa Darijom jutros. U suštini, naravno da je ideja da izvozimo više od $2 milijarde godišnje poljoprivrednih proizvoda. Bilo ko zna malo ili mnogo u poljoprivredi će vam reći da Srbija ima sve predispozicije, čak i ako nemate neku pretpostavku veoma brzog rasta cene hrane, da izvozi do 8 do 10 milijardi dolara godišnje. A to je izvoz koji je najmanje uvozno zavisan. E sad, kako do toga doći? Naravno, rekli ste neke stvari koje podrazumevaju infrastrukturne investicije. Mi imamo veoma mali deo našeg poljoprivrednog zemljišta koje je predmet navodnjavanja i odvodnjavanja. Imamo veoma mali broj hektara koji su pod plastenicima. Znači, ima poznatih netehnoloških stvari koje jednostavno su tu da obezbede mnogo jači doprinos poljoprivrede. Što se tiče znanja, sa Evropskom investicionom bankom, i sad moram da podsjetim našeg 5. prijatelja sa AAA, to je Banka za razvoj Saveta Evrope, sa njima smo definisali 15 miliona eura za znanje u domenu poljoprivrede. Konkretno, veoma dobro znate da Srbija, i niko ne može do kraja da objasni kako je to moguće, ali eto, to je tako, i dalje ima 3 proizvođača semena koje izdržavaju konkurenciju multinacionalki. Stalno nam govore da treba da ih zatvorimo, ali to naravno ne dolazi u obzir. Ili ćemo da ih dobro razvijemo, pa bar da ih razvijemo pa da ih prodamo kako treba, a ne ovako. I zbog toga ulažemo kroz uobičajene naučne projekte, ali isto tako kroz investiciju od nekoliko miliona eura u kapacitet u domenu genoma našeg nacionalnog centra u Novom Sadu. To je Seme Novi Sad. Drugi element, zajedno sa Novosadskim univerzitetom i tim institutima koji tamo postoje, radimo na jednom agri kampusu nauke, gde će biti prisutne nekoliko institucija i naravno naša ideja da budemo u stanju da pratimo, a u nekoj meri gde je to moguće, i učestvujemo u onome što će biti napredak, jer u suštini marža u poljoprivredi dolazi tamo gde se ona ukršta sa zdravljem. I to je poznato, to je lako reći, to je mnogo teško uraditi, nije lako izboriti se sa velikim multinacionalkama, ali to nije nemoguće. I u tom smislu, naravno da sa ovih 20% bruto domaćih proizvoda, koje danas dolazi iz agrobiznisa, želimo da idemo korak. Dao sam samo jedan mali prikaz onome što želimo da radimo, a jutro sa kolegom Scannapiekom smo pričali o tome da idemo i korak dalje sa njima, kao što sa nekim drugim institucijama već radimo u domenu agribiznisa, uključujući i sa vašom bankom, već nekoliko godina.
Hvala. Dalje? Pitanja? Bila je neka ruka. Imamo još nešto malo vremena.
Ili bi ljudi da pređe nešto drugo,
a? Ili je vreme da završava?
Dobro što mogu.
Dobro. Posljednja šansa, u redu. Evo, napravili smo jedan, moram da kažem, za mene neočekivani put u razgovoru danas, gde smo počeli sa činjenicom da je ekonomska situacija globalno, a svakako u Evropi, vrlo teška i da prema tome ne možemo da računamo na jednostavna rešenja, niti na povoljno okruženje kad je reč o našem regionu, ali u toku razgovora, kako je on sve dalje napredovao, bar ja sam postala sve optimističnija, jer istina je da kretanja ekonomska jesu vrlo blisko povezano, ali ne jednoznačno, i da ukoliko budemo radili i ulagali, podrške će biti za saradnju, za bolje iskorišćavanje potencijala i da je u okviru toga zaista neophodno da to bolje iskorišćavanje potencijala dođe i kroz regionalnu koordinaciju. O tome šta je najhitnije potrebno za pojačanu regionalnu koordinaciju i integraciju razgovarat će se detaljnije sutra i ja vam se veoma zahvaljujem na pažnji za danas, kao i našim panelistima na učešću.